and welcome to episode 76 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast, the re-evolution, the regeneration, the reloaded, the remixed, whatever you want to call it, Mutant Blitz Podcast, because now I actually have a co-host to have a conversation with. So the conversations that I have with people that I know are actually going to be on the podcast now, and joining me until he gets tired of me is a buddy of mine from the gym, Ryan Brown. Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm great, Josh. Good to be here. It's very exciting. Big fan of Marvel. We always have like a half an hour long talk in the gym. So
right.
It's cool we get to put this on the pod now.
I have conversations with people all the time that never actually get recorded. So the idea is we're going to record the conversations now for everyone else to benefit from these conversations, basically.
Right. That way it's not just like a one-way podcast where you actually have a conversation and more is built off of that and more information is spread.
Exactly. So today we're talking about the Eternals movie. So let's open up a cold one and get started on episode 76 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. And remember, spoilers ahead. So before we dive into the actual details of the movie, I want to preface this by saying, yes, spoilers are ahead, not just for this movie, but for other Marvel properties. If you don't mind being spoiled for multiple things, this is your podcast. This is your episode here. So before we dig any specific details, Ryan, I want you to give me your initial reaction of the Eternals movie.
Well, you know what? I know that it got really bad reviews. I was really excited by it. I thought it was a great movie. Marvel did a great job at world building like they did with Guardians of the Galaxy. A lot of fun characters, great casting. It was a little long. I feel like they could have cut out a few parts that weren't as necessary, but it was a fun movie. It felt like Marvel was trying to expand the universe, and I thought it was great.
See, I felt that the movie was good, but not great, because I went in by the premise of this. If you take the characters out of the movie, is the story still the same? And I think that's the flaw of it, because listen, I know Chloe Zhao, she's an Emmy Award, Academy Award winner, blah, 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 whatever award she won. I can't keep track of these awards half time anyway. But she's somebody who is great at presentation and imagery and style, but she's not a great storyteller. So I felt like I've seen some of the reaction online where people are like, well, there was this plot hole and that plot hole. I honestly, I have to understand where they're coming from, because this was not a traditional Marvel movie. This was something completely different than we've ever seen before, which is, one, you're dealing with Celestials on a full scale, which we've never seen before. And number two, let's be realistic, nobody knows who the Eternals are unless you're a comic book fan, right? Like, people at least know Spider-Man, Hulk, Captain America. You go to the average, comic book person, you ask them who the Eternals are, the majority of them have no idea. So this was for a lot of people the first exposure they've ever had to these characters, Ryan.
Right. And I think Marvel kind of knew that going in, and that's why they chose Chloe Zhao as their director, because they knew it was just an introduction and that they could build off of it for the future scene in the post-credit scenes.
So let's dig deeper into the details. First of all, for those who don't know, I want to give a little background here. So Eternals was the comic line written by Jack Kirby when he came back to Marvel from his stint with DC. For those who don't know, if you ever see a movie with Darkseid in it, that was created by Jack Kirby. So he was at DC for a while, and DC said they were going to let him do what he wanted, but they didn't really let him do what he wanted. They only let him do a certain point. So he left DC, came back to Marvel, and the agreement was he was going to have free reign with one thing, and that was creating the Eternals and this whole aspect of the universe. So, and the reason why it's significant is because Jack Kirby was also the guy who co-created the Fantastic Four. So you had the Celestials originally that was debuted in the Fantastic Four that he brought into the Eternals. So this is something that people are drawing off of about 50 years of comic history to make this movie. So this movie was not based on a specific comic, which, Ryan, I'm glad it wasn't, because honestly, if it was based on one comic, people probably would have been confused. So I think Marvel did a good job at condensing 50 years of comic history into a movie and attempting to make it digestible.
Yeah, definitely. And you brought up the Fantastic Four being a part of it. Do you think that's how they're going to find a way to introduce them and maybe Galactus in the future?
So I do think Galactus has something to do with this because maybe not directly the Fantastic Four. I think the Fantastic Four are going to be somehow semi-introduced because of Kang, because Kang made his debut in a Fantastic
Okay.
Four comic. But I do think that Galactus is involved, and we'll get to that in a little bit because I don't want to lose people from the beginning here. Keep that in the back of your pocket, though. What did you think about how the characters were presented? Because to me, I thought it was interesting that they didn't overtly explain the powers. What they did was they kind of let you see and observe the powers, so the audience kind of like figured it out as they went along.
Yeah, it was great how they let the characters be very diverse, not only in their powers but in their personalities, which I think went hand in hand, and that made the characters more likable in turn.
I thought the casting was underrated. I understand that people are making a big deal about how it's a diverse cast, but to me, I'm less concerned about how diverse it was, how quality it was. I think the quality is what gets overlooked here because I think some people who don't like the movie, again, they're coming into it thinking this is going to be a Chloe Zhao movie and not realizing it's a Marvel movie.
Right, for sure. Yeah. So you got to keep an open mind regardless. And again, that's kind of what Marvel was looking for, was something outside the box. So I think they hit they hit the target on that one.
I think the two biggest things in the movie that everyone needs to take away from is number one, Celestials are here to stay. I think we've gotten teased about Celestials and about who they are. You finally got to see Arishem, who's the top Celestial of the food chain in this movie. So they're not going anywhere. We've seen hints and teases and suggestions about Celestials. People are trying to figure out, well, where does Ego, the living planet, fit into all this and everything. But I think that we are stuck with Celestials now. And that this is going to be like another 10 years of these guys being involved in these movies because, you know, Marvel doesn't introduce something just for the heck of it. They introduce everything because there's a plan, there's a setup, there's a connective tissue. Everything's connected kind of thing. So that's my biggest first thing I think people need to understand. The second thing is the Eternals are not human. So don't treat them like they are superheroes. Now, I think it's a little ridiculous. People keep calling them robots. They're not robots. They're more like synthezoids. You know, they're humanoids. They're living beings that are based on some sort of technology that we don't understand or know, basically. I think that's a better way of understanding. It's kind of like how the Vision, he's not human, but he's not a robot either. You know what I mean? So it's, you know, to the Eternals like a more advanced version of Vision, basically.
Yeah, that part of the movie actually really confused me, where they Arishem brought Cersei into like the area where she was made. I was
The
like,
World
wait,
Forge.
this came
It's called
completely
the
out of
World
left
Forge.
field. Yes, the World Forge, World Forge. That really confused me. I was like, whoa, this completely goes back on like the entire movie right now.
So,
But it was
yeah.
very important for sure.
So for those who don't know, here's what happened. So all of the Eternals are made by the Celestials. So in many ways, the Celestials are their God creator. Even though the Celestials didn't create everything, they created the Eternals and the Deviants. And the idea is that every time an Eternal fulfills their job, if you want to call it that, you know, they go to an Earth, they cultivate it, and their job is done. Their memories are stored in the World Forge for the Celestials to study, and then they just kind of regenerate them at the Forge. It's similar, not literally, but it's a similar concept to how in the Matrix you plug in and you have your virtual body and then your real body. Think about how it's the opposite. You know, the real body of the Eternals is out there, but their virtual conscious is stored in like the storage banks at the World Forge.
I what would you say that your favorite part of the movie was, Josh?
My favorite part of the movie was Dane Whitman asking questions. Because and I know it's a small thing, but I love when movies find like a regular person or a regular character that is basically asking the questions the audience already wants to know. So, you know, Dane Whitman obviously was the main guy in the beginning, and then, you know, later it was Karun, the assistant to Kingo. I like those moments. I like the moments where the characters kind of ask the captain obvious things, but then the characters in the movie realize that someone had to ask that question because of how stupid some of the stuff sounds without those questions being asked. Honestly, that was honestly my favorite parts.
He does it so well too. Like I forget the actor's name, but his timing and the way that it
Kit
just fit into
Harington.
the story, like coming straight in from phase 3, asking these type of questions, how they fit into the story going ahead. It was really needed.
Yeah, Kit Harington from Game of Thrones. It was kind of a cool moment where him
Yes.
and Richard Madden were both there. Icarus is Richard Madden, for those who don't know, because there was a famous final scene of Game of Thrones, for those who don't know, where, basically, Richard Madden says, next time I see you, I guess you'll be in black. And Kit Harington turns around and says, well, I do like that color, basically saying. And it's funny because now he's going to be the Black Knight. And that was the tease at the end of the credits. So thanks to Game of Thrones for playing along with the Marvel Cinematic Universe indirectly there. But I thought Kit Harington should have gotten more screen time, though. I felt like they didn't use him enough. I would have liked to have seen them bring him along on this whole journey. That's kind of what he does in the comics. He's a guy who's there for everything. And he was kind of only there just for Cersei, which was a little weird, honestly. I felt that, they could have used him more.
Yeah, for sure. I do understand that they're trying to build up his character and that in later movies he will have a more prominent role. But just to kind of sell him short like that for such a fun character, it wasn't really right. One thing that confused me later on in the movie was the Unimind. I didn't really understand that entire part of the movie. I know they explained it well on how it could help them win and defeat Tiamat, I think his name is.
That's correct. There you go.
But I didn't really understand how Druig really helped them get there. That part really confused me.
So it wasn't specifically Druig. So the idea is that they based part of the Unimind technology on Druig's power set. Because his power set is he can reach into human minds. Whereas the Unimind is reaching into the Eternals. So that's kind of why they referenced Druig there. But you needed more than one Eternal to do it. And the reason why Cersei had to be the one is not just because she has the connection to the Celestial, but because of the fact that her power set, which this is where, if you don't know comics, you don't fully understand her power set is manipulation of things on a molecular level. So that's why she was able to basically turn a birthing Celestial into basically a glacier. So, and that's really one of the spoilers of the movie, and that is they defeat the Celestial because she turns a Celestial basically into an iceberg, which is a problem because they just kind of left it there, which I thought was kind of hilarious too. It's like, hey, we saved the world, but we left the mess here for you guys to deal with, which is probably going to be used 100 times in the upcoming movies. It's going to be like, well, at least you're not the Eternals. You didn't leave us a dead Celestial in the middle of the ocean or something like that. You know what I mean? Or like, at least you're not a Celestial and you didn't just kill a volcano for goodness sake. Or at least you're not a Celestial and you didn't, pollute the planet with a dead carcass of a Celestial or something. Like, there'll be some references like that because Marvel will have fun with it. But that's really what they did. They literally were just like, hey, we saved the day and we're leaving. Peace.
Yeah, just a huge new iceberg. It was a tropical area too. It was by a volcano.
Yeah, it's by an active volcano in the middle of a tropical area. I mean, they literally completely changed the ecosystem in an area just to save the planet. And that's probably why people are freaking out right now, because they're saying that's where Namor is going to come from, because that's probably near Atlantis, and Namor is going to be ticked off that somebody, busted up his area of town, and basically that's where he's probably going to jump in and, be all peeved about that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I was really confused how his character would come into Black Panther 2.
I think everyone was confused, because at the end of the day, Namor is a character that's been around since 1939, if I remember correctly. And, for a dude who's got almost 100 years of history, it's like, well, where do you pick up off? Like, where do you grab a character at? Like, Captain America, we get that. Captain America, World War II, great. You know what I mean? But Namor, it's like, I don't really understand how we're going to do this, but we're going to make it work. And the other problem with Namor was people forget that Namor was actually owned by Universal, like the Hulk. So Marvel couldn't use Namor until a certain point that the rights expired anyway. Because there was supposed to be a Namor movie, I believe it was 2005, but it completely fell apart, and then the rights expired. So that's why they're able to do Namor now.
Okay, gotcha. I also saw a leak where they were going to try and make it more of like an Aztec background for Atlantis. I thought that was really cool. They're kind of switching up the character a little bit.
I mean, it technically goes along with mythology because the idea is that before Atlantis was sunk under the ocean, the idea is that Atlantis is kind of like one of the former great cities of the world, like the Aztec Empire and Athens, Greece, and Rome and Babylon, which we saw in the Eternals movie, the heart of civilization, Mesopotamia, and the great gardens of Babylon, which I thought was a nice, cool way to throw them into history. Because people forget that the reason why Marvel does what they do is because they take everyone into lowercase g and say, well, they were a person. Like Athena, she's a god in history. Well, she's a person. Icarus is a person. Phastos is a person. Gilgamesh, the legend of Gilgamesh, which some people consider Gilgamesh actually the first superhero in world history based on mythology, is an actual individual. So they're interlinking them into history because remember, when you're dealing with time travel, which is what Kang's all about, I've been telling you that Kang's going to be connected to everything. Well, Kang was in Egypt in the comics as Ramatut.
Okay.
So how are you going to have somebody a part of history if you don't have somebody else part of history? You know what I mean? So now you have the Eternals. Well, the Eternals have been here. Well, they haven't been there. Well, if they were there, they're going to run into somebody else kind of thing. So, it's one of those deals as well, where it's like, hey, they were dealing with the deviants, but over in Egypt, Kang was dealing with something completely else. So, this is a way for them to now, if they want to say Kang's been here or there in history, people are like, well, why wasn't that person involved? Like, well, they weren't there. Like the whole thing in Thor, how, Odin talked about, New Asgard and they go to Norway or Sweden, wherever it was. And it's like, well, yeah, the Scandinavians worshipped the Norse gods. Well, why were the Norse gods never fighting fill in the blank? Well, because they never met each other.
Okay. Right. And that goes hand in hand with the Eternals not doing anything throughout the years because they were at completely different parts of the earth. Also, them not being able to deal with anything outside of deviants.
Right.
Which is actually another thing I wanted to talk about was the main deviant villain. I forget his name. I did not like him at all. I thought they completely sold his character short. Like with his ending.
His name was Crow, by the way.
Crow. With Thena literally just taking care of him so easily. I did not like that at all. I thought he was an interesting character where they were leading somewhere and then he just gets sliced into thirds.
Yeah, that's where the Marvel history of killing off good villains really comes back to haunt them. Because think about how cool it would have been if Iron Man 3 Obadiah Stane was still around, right? It's the same thing, right? I see your people can't see your face on the pod, but your face just had a epiphany moment over there.
That would have been perfect. Imagine he's the Mandarin or something.
Right. Or he's helping the Mandarin or something.
Right.
You know what I mean? So this history of Marvel killing off usable villains. This is another version. And Crow would have been a guy you could have kept around and he would have been snuck away at the end. You would be like, well, where did Crow go? He's going to show up somewhere else, kind of thing. Because at the end of the day, in comics, the idea if it's all connected, villains have multiple enemies. You know what I mean? So Doctor Doom, for example, fights the Fantastic Four and the Avengers, not just the Fantastic Four. Or another example would be, well, the Deviants didn't only fight the Eternals. He also fought Atlanteans, where Namor could come in. There are so many ways you could have gone with it. Like you said, they killed off a usable character just to show how powerful Athena was, which was cheap.
Right, of course. In the first movie too, like of all the times to do it, with that little screen time and his character arc just starting to come in place. I think he started talking maybe 15 minutes earlier in the
Right.
movie.
He talks 15 minutes into the movie, and it's like, hey, we're going to chop you in 4 pieces. Thanks for playing the game.
Oh man, that was tough for me because he was just a fun character. And is it Bill Skarsgård?
Yep.
He's such a great actor. I love his voice. He scared me as a kid watching it, but it's a lot of fun for sure.
How did you feel about them turning Sprite into a human at the end? Did you like that? Did you dislike that?
You know what? I didn't really care for it. I didn't like her character too much.
Sprite,
I understood it.
yeah, Sprite's character is like that annoying like character that's like they have to be there, but they don't have to be there kind of thing.
Right, yeah. Is that why they did that to her to turn her back human? Like, or is that a part of the storyline?
I think it's part of the storyline, but I think also it's an easy way for Marvel to just never go back to her if they don't want to, kind of thing.
Okay.
Because for those who don't know, so the character of Sprite in mythology is technically the basis for like fairies and like the ancient pictures of baby angels and Tinkerbell and the Peter Pan story. So like, the child that never grew up, that kind of thing. Some people say that Sprite is the basis for Peter Pan because Peter Pan never grew up. So Sprite historically does have a relevance in terms of mythology, but it is a pretty useless character in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, her biggest triumph was I think stabbing Cersei, and even that like didn't even faze her.
Right. Yeah, Sprite needed to be kind of phased out, which I think they kind of did. And if they bring Sprite back, it doesn't have to be anything significant. And the good thing is the actress Leah McHugh, if you think about it this way, because Sprite never grows up, right? Well, now the actress can grow up, and we can meet her later on as an older person. So it's
right,
like,
of course, as years go on.
She became human. See, this is what she looks like 10 years later. So
Marvel playing tricks.
Yeah, Marvel's always planning for something. I mean, and don't forget, she could show up in the Young Avengers movie in like 5 years or something and be like, hey, Sprite can give us some history on this villain that came out of nowhere. Sprite, take it away. Well, in 1100, I was there, and kind of thing. So that could be a Sprite role as well later. So, which I think is hilarious because a lot of people who are probably watching the movie who are like, why is an Eternal named after a soda?
I never understood it. She was not a fun character for me.
Yeah, that was definitely the most emo of the characters.
Yeah.
My other problem with the movies, I didn't like the fact they killed off Ajax so easily. I felt that kind of like took away from some of the movie because I would have liked to see Ajax get some more airtime because she was the leader of the Eternal. She was like the mother hen of the group, and it's like, hey, Icarus threw her to the Deviants and left her for dead, and it's like, wow, that felt like really weak.
Yeah, even though her powers like aren't really offense related, she still could have held her own.
Right. I mean, she's killed
Deviants before.
Right. She's killed Deviants before. And the fact that, like I said, she was an integral part of the beginning of the movie. She was like the leader of the group. And it's like, we're just going to whack her off. Hey, Selma Hayek, thanks for being here.
Yeah. It was definitely like an emotional scene. But she could have put up more of a fight. And it would have been more interesting if they made it come down to Icarus being the one to do it.
Yeah, they would have made him actually kill her, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, I think that would have had some more juice to it for sure. Definitely.
For sure. Yeah.
All right, so let's get to the end of the movie here, and we can start, teasing ahead for what's coming out of the result of this. Obviously, the first end trailer, well, mid-credit scene, I guess was the actual name for it, was the whole appearance of Eros played by Harry Styles, which I think is amazing casting because anybody who knows about Eros in the comics, he is super controversial. So why not get a controversial person to play this character? Because most people are like, why would you want Harry Styles in the MCU? Well, now he can play the most like bizarro character in MCU history. For those who don't know, Eros's power set is he can manipulate pheromones and hormones. So, like, he can literally make women fall in love with him.
Yeah, it sounds about right. If Harry Styles is playing him, sounds about right.
Yeah, and there's actually a comic that's semi-controversial where Eros goes on trial with the International Court of the Galaxy because they accuse him of date raping women because he was manipulating the women to be with him. And the person who defends him in that trial was She-Hulk.
Oh.
So keep that in the back of your mind. We might have a She-Hulk meeting Eros moment down the road at some point.
Jeez.
So a little interconnectivity there for you. But in the mid-trailer scene, obviously Eros shows up, which is hilarious. He's got a gesture and Pip the Troll basically introducing him. Which, how about Patton Oswalt? That dude gets about 1 million Marvel roles at this point.
Oh my gosh, I've heard his voice so many times in those movies.
He's just getting roles left and right. Like, who's the guy that he knows? I want to know that guy. But Eros just shows up and he's like, hey, I can help you find them. And because I'm an Eternal like you. And then they drop in there that he's the brother of Thanos. And people are probably sitting there like, well, how is that possible? And I'm like, wait, well, I thought Eternals were robots. Well, the reason why is because Eros and Thanos were not made by the Celestials. That's why this is relevant. So at a point in time that they'll probably get to in the next Eternals movie, there is a group of Eternals who rebelled against the Celestials and ran off to the planet Titan. And Thanos' father, Lars, has children with Suisan. And those are two of the more powerful Eternals of the group that went to this planet. And one is Eros, who is, this perfect-looking human. And Thanos looks like he's half deviant and half Eternal, basically. So that's part of the reason why Thanos can hold the Infinity Stones, because he has the genes of a Eternal, but he also has the genes of a mutation, and the mutation allows him to stabilize the power. So if you think about it, Thanos, even though he was a deviant, is technically the most powerful of all the Eternals, technically, because he can handle cosmic power on an infinite scale.
Okay, yeah, I was actually just about to ask you about that because I want to see a dynamic where Eros talks about his brother kind of blipping out half of the universe.
Oh, they're going to have that conversation. I guarantee it. And now here's the real question. Was Eros blipped out?
That confused me because can Eternals be blipped?
I mean, theoretically, all life is what they said, right?
That's true.
And Thanos said it was random. Remember, he said it was random.
Yeah.
So if it's random, it could be any living being. It doesn't have to be specifically life by procreation.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I don't know, because I feel like they would have brought up in the movie that one of them was blipped out or something.
Well, remember, Thanos specifically left the original Avengers there. So he obviously had enough power when he blipped out half the universe to at least say, I want these people to be alive.
Okay.
So, and now the other thing is, there's a theory out there. I want to know what you think about this theory. That Thanos didn't just blip out the universe because he was trying to save the universe, but because he was trying to stop emergencies across the universe.
Oh, I like that theory. I like that theory a lot. Since he was
an Eternal,
one of the runaway Eternals, and he does have a deviant gene. Maybe he knew that that's what happened, and the fact that all of Titan had died.
Right.
Maybe it kind of brought some hatred towards the Celestials, and
because we know that a Celestial didn't come out of Titan because Titan's not a normal planet. But we do know that the Eternals would have known about the Celestials' game plan because if Ajax and Icarus knew it, then others had to know it too.
Right, at least one of them.
Right, and the reason why Athena's brain was all messed up because she remembered when this happened on other planets. So you have to think that Thanos might have had that in the back of his mind as well. That wasn't maybe his primary motive, but it may have been part of like the equation because at the end of the day, who else is going to stop Eternals? I'm sorry, who else is going to stop Celestials, right? And that's where your question earlier was. Galactus.
Right.
So Galactus consumes planets because he is the only thing that keeps the celestial population from getting too much. Because when he eats a planet that has a celestial egg in it, he's eating the egg. So it's like population control.
He's the villain to a celestial.
Correct. Because he has as much cosmic power as one celestial does.
Okay, I always thought he was on their side, but now explaining how they need the population to be a certain amount for them to birth a new celestial, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. So
but then again, that confuses me how like if the Celestials know about Galactus, why don't they just stop them himself?
Well, maybe they don't think he's important enough to stop him in the short term. Maybe they have a long-term goal in mind kind of thing. Because, it's a vast universe, and now there's a multiverse. So who knows, maybe this version of the multiverse is young enough that Galactus hasn't eaten enough baby Celestials yet to really bother them. Whereas maybe in another multiverse, he's wiped out like more of their population. They get more ticked off at him then. Technically in the MCU, the MCU as we know it with Earth is technically only about 8,000 years old. So when you really break it down, there might be another multiverse that's 8 million years old. And, now of course that universe might have had Ragnarok, and that universe might have had a classic, maybe Thanos does win in that universe. What the whole what if show is, what if, right? What if there's a universe where the Celestials did procreate unstopped, and there was never a Galactus, there was never a Thanos, there was never an Avengers, there was never a Fantastic Four, there was never an X-Men, there was never anybody, then what happens?
Jeez, that hurts my head. My gosh. I'm still like grasping the idea of the multiverse in Marvel. It's like, what if only gave us a handful of episodes, and there's still like an infinite amount of possibilities.
Well,
it's crazy to think about like what could be.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's something else we should explain to people. So the Watcher in the What If show, him and his race are among the elders of the universe. So them, the Celestials, the Collector, the Grandmaster, they've all been around, quote unquote, since the beginning. So if you think about it, even though a Celestial is crazy powerful, you also know the Watcher is crazy powerful. So, and if those Thanos can snap out half the universe, theoretically, he could have used the Infinity Gauntlet to wipe out Celestials. So, for as powerful as Celestials are, they're not unbeatable, which is important to keep in mind, because we're going to have a showdown with a Celestial at some point, because we do know one thing. Remembering Guardians of the Galaxy 1, nowhere was in the head of a dead Celestial. So we know that somebody at some point killed a Celestial. Now, I don't know if we'll ever be overtly introduced to that person, but they could always use that as an example to say, remember the Celestial got his head chopped off kind of thing? So we know he can be killed, which is where the other post-credit scene comes in. The Ebony Blade.
How is that related to killing Celestials? It's just a sword.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because in the comics, the Ebony Blade was used by Null, the creator of the symbiotes, to kill a Celestial.
Oh, that's a complicated character to introduce, though.
I don't think they're introducing Null specifically, because then you're going to have to ask Sony for permission for Venom and all that stuff. But if you remember, the Ebony Blade looked like he almost had a symbiote on it, like some sort of living,
when it was going towards his finger.
Right, some living organism. So I think what they're going to do is they're going to use the concept of symbiotes to explain how the holder of it is imbued with power. Because for those who don't know, so Dane Whitman's character is a descendant of Percival of Camelot. And in Camelot, Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, they had Excalibur, which you saw earlier in the movie, in Eternals. Athena pulled Excalibur, and Sprite turns to her, and it's like, oh, King Arthur always had a crush on you. And, well, the opposite of Excalibur is the Ebony Blade. And, of course, that was, wielded by Percival, the Dark Knight. And Dane Whitman is a descendant of Percival. And, of course, for those who don't know, in Arthurian legend and mixed with Marvel Comics, Merlin created the Ebony Blade from a meteorite rock. So that meteorite rock could have had a symbiote in it, and that's why the holder of it turns into this freakazoid with power because, at some point, this blade has killed a celestial. Well, that's a lot of power to take out. So you got to have something going on with that blade. So he might not know all that, Dane Whitman, but he knows that this blade can do stuff. And I keep using the word blade because that's the voice that people hear in the background is Marshala Ali's blade asking him, sure you're ready for that? Because Dane Whitman is going to be in the Blade movie.
Oh, that made me so excited hearing his voice. He's honestly one of my favorite Marvel characters. I loved watching the older movies when I was younger, so I'm really excited for all that. That was the only leak that I didn't hear about the movie was the second post-credit scene. And once I watched it in theaters, I was dumbfounded. That made me super excited. It caught me completely off guard.
Well, it caught me off guard because I know who the voice was at first. I had no idea. I was trying to figure out, who is that voice? Is it the Watcher? Is it Nick Fury? Who is it? And when you find out that it's Blade / Eric Brooks, you're like, okay, now I know what Marvel's doing. And you know what's coming. If you're going to have a Blade movie, and you're going to have the Black Knight, at some point, you're going to have Midnight Suns.
Oh.
And those who don't know, the Midnight Suns are like the Avengers of mystical villains of Dracula and demons and all those people. And they basically it's a group of heroes who are outcasts basically. Nobody really wants them on their team. They just kind of tell them to go and be their own team kind of thing. So, and we know that Blade has a long history of Dracula being a villain. Lilith, the creator of the vampires, she could be a villain. Selena, who's a very evil mutant from about 2,000 years before prior time, she could be a villain of those characters. There's a lot of talk that Ghost Rider, they're going to bring him back so they can put him in the Midnight Suns. People may have heard about Elsa Bloodstone. She can be in the Midnight Suns. We know Moon Knight show's coming. He's a Midnight Sun. And the funny part is, who's a Midnight Sun who is not a superpowered being, but it's absolutely hilarious because it's easy for them to put him in? The Punisher.
Oh, yeah, no, he's perfect for it.
Yeah, it's easy to introduce him. You can introduce him anywhere.
Right, literally. He's perfect for any setting, especially if it's a dark theme like that.
Right, and we already know they're rebooting the Daredevil show for Marvel. So,
right.
You could throw the Punisher in there if you wanted to, however you want, I mean, the Punisher could be introduced anywhere you want with any explanation because his story is not exactly that hard to interweave.
It's almost like a Batman-esque story. It's just something that can be pushed right in there and make sense for a character.
Just slide it right in, somewhere.
Right.
Because we know that Matt Murdock is also going to be in the She-Hulk show. We know that...
Right, with his older suit.
Right, and the idea is that he's going to be Peter Parker's lawyer dealing with the issues after his identity is exposed. Apparently that's part of the trailer that Marvel and Sony have been arguing about is, whether Matt Murdock's going to be in the trailer or not, which... We'll find out exactly this. Obviously, this podcast is being recorded before the Spider-Man trailer drops. We'll do a completely separate pod about the Spider-Man trailer. But back to Dane Whitman. So obviously, they're preparing him for future movies, not just the Eternals movie. You could also you could make him show up in Moon Knight if you wanted to. Maybe the final episode of Moon Knight. He's dealing with something that's beyond his ability to deal with by himself because Moon Knight's a complicated character for those who don't know, and. Maybe Blade and Dane Whitman show up and be like, hey, man, we're here to help. And then...
that would be amazing. And then I'm really excited for that show.
And at the end of the episode, Blade could be like, hey, man, you owe me one.
Leads right into the movie, which that movie's coming out in 2023, correct?
Tentatively. Technically, it's TBD, but there's a lot of leaks out there that Marvel wants it as one of the first movies in Phase 5. So
Okay.
the idea is that Phase 4 is all about setting up Phase 5, basically. That's why some of the more crazy movies are Phase 5, like Guardians 3, Blade, Fantastic Four. All that stuff is technically Phase 5 because they're using Phase 4 to transition from the Infinity Saga into the next era. Because remember, Kang is the new Thanos, basically.
Right, for sure. Yeah. So, where does Phase 4 end, do you think?
Phase 4 technically ends with Thor: Love and Thunder.
Okay. And where's that story gonna drop us off at?
Well, that's the problem. We don't fully know because technically that's supposed to lead into Guardians 3. But considering the villain of the movie is Gore the God Butcher, for goodness sake, Marvel could go a few different directions with Thor: Love and Thunder. I mean, heck, the Eternals could show up in that movie for all we know. I mean, there's so many ways they can go with that movie. So it will definitely be fascinating. And if we're dealing with a multiverse, who knows who could be where at this point? But by the time we get to Thor: Love and Thunder, maybe the explanation for why, Jane Foster becomes Lady Thor is because she gets a Mjolnir from another multiverse. You know what I mean? There's so many explanations for why they could do what they're going to do moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. It's all really confusing, but knowing Marvel, they'll explain it to us well.
All right, we'll wrap up for this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Ryan, any final thoughts on Eternals?
Not really. I'm just excited to see the characters they introduced at the post-credit scenes and see more from the characters in the rest of the movie. So,
do you have a preference of a character you're looking forward to seeing more from moving forward?
Definitely Dane Whitman.
Yeah,
Loved
I think
his character and
Dane Whitman. I mean, like you said, Kit Harington is such a good actor.
For sure. Yeah, he's great. Definitely. He could take that role so far.
I want to see what happens with Thena because does she keep having these mental episodes?
Right, the Mad Weary.
Do they fix that? Do they not fix that? I want to know. I'm curious.
Maybe it could just be another Chloe Zhao plot hole. We'll see.
Maybe. All right, he's Ryan Brown. Ryan, plug your social media for everybody.
All right, my social media is Ryan_Brown___. That's on Instagram. So, go follow me there. It was a pleasure, Josh. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited to continue to do this.
Absolutely. On the next edition, we will talk about Shang-Chi because Shang-Chi has a completely different impact on the MCU moving forward. And I think we're going to see more of Shang-Chi's impact short-term, and Eternals is going to be more long-term. And, of course, by the time we record that episode as well, we'll know the Spider-Man trailer. So we might actually have to do the next podcast, be the Spider-Man trailer, and then do Shang-Chi at this point. So he's Ryan Brown. I'm Josh Henning. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Hit the like button, subscribe, download, wherever you're checking out the podcast. And we'll catch you next time for another edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast.